I'm in a jam, I'm in a trial, fresh blood on my hand. Time was a storybook, time was a thief.
Let's try to get started. I know people may gradually filter in still. Hi, my name's Bob Megna. I'm president of the Rockefeller Institute. I'd like to make a few housekeeping things. The forum is being live streamed and will be available on the Institute's YouTube channel, as well as the Institute's website for folks who want to look at it. In consideration of everyone's experience, we ask you silence all cell phones for the duration of the event. And for your convenience, I'm sure you figured it out, restrooms are on the first floor, and accessible bathrooms are up on the third floor. I'd like to thank the folks at the Institute who helped put this together, and I'd like to thank our three guests today who are in an incredibly busy part of the budget cycle for doing this. I think it's incredibly important for folks to know a little bit more about the staff folks that work behind the scenes to try to get a budget done. And I think, unlike recent prior directors, I'm sure an on-time budget this year is in their future. So I'm not gonna waste a lot of time introducing the folks. What I would ask our three guests is to spend maybe 2 minutes talking about your background and a little bit about yourselves, because I think it helps inform the process. You don't have three folks with more experience in budget process than the three folks sitting in front of you. And they have it from different angles, which I think is always critically important. The legislative angle, the budget division angle, but many of the folks with us today share that they've looked at it from multiple views. I think David's even looked at it from the local government side of the world here in Albany. So I think that gives them added insight into the budget process, into how to get a budget put together and how to get it finally done. And serve the interests of their principals. So I'm going to turn it over to Blake, who's going to go first and do a little bit of an introduction, and then we'll do David and Phillip, and again, I'll ask them a few questions at the end, and I think that's pretty much the schedule for today. So Blake, why don't you start?
Great, thanks Bob, and thanks to everyone here at the Institute for pulling things together today, and for the folks that have joined us. My name is Blake Washington. I'm the State Budget Director. I've been serving in this role since August, but prior to this I worked for the State Assembly Ways and Means Committee for over 20 years, last serving as Secretary to the committee over the last 9 years. Prior to that, I was a probation officer. I served as probation officer in Sullivan County, so it's just a fun fact about me that I'd like to share. Supervised 70 youthful offenders when I was not too far away from the age that they were. So as I said, I've been here about 6 months. Was appointed in August. It's been an interesting ride for me because I've been very familiar for 20 years working on the budget post the 16th of January forward, the executive budget submission forward. So in the last handful of months, I've really had the opportunity to work with Governor Hochul in putting the budget together. and briefing her for hours on end, just on each and every component of the budget. So that's been really gratifying, really interesting in the last handful of months. Otherwise, most importantly, I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I live here locally, and I'm just happy to be here today. So nice to see everyone. You want to just introduce yourself?
My name is Dave Friedel. I'm the Secretary of the Senate Finance Committee. Like Bob mentioned, I do have some local government experience, but I started off at Ways and Means as well. So I've known Blake and Phil for close to 20 years now. But I was at Ways and Means for about 8 years. I took a year and a little bit more off to join the budget division, but quickly popped back to the legislature. After that, I was at Albany County as the Commissioner of Management and Budget for about 3.5 years, where I did definitely have the opportunity to see kind of a bit more of the executive side on a different scale, but creating the budget, and then also the impacts of state decision-making on local governments. And then after that, I spent 5 years at the Citizens Budget Commission, which is a nonprofit fiscal watchdog, and I've been in my current position since my 4th budget. I started in December of 2020. Which was kind of a very interesting time to change jobs. I had some people who worked for me for 6 months, and I had never been in a room with them. Suddenly they walked in, I was like, wow, you're tall. It was kind of one of those funny things. And I am also a dad and husband. I have an 11-year-old and a 7-year-old, and we live in Del Mar. And I have a 11-month-old puppy who likes to wake me up.
Phillip, and I would like to say that my grandfather many years ago had said to me, "Why do you ask so many questions?" As a result of that, after growing up and being involved in many different activities, whether it's in college or in school, I'm always involved in communicating with people. And so when I stumbled, actually was recommended by a professor at the University of Albany after writing a couple of papers on weird topics like hedonic pricing and some land value taxation issues. He said, why don't you go and take a job in Ways and Means? And ended up working with Program Council on the issue of real property taxation. And then from there, I met this tall gentleman in that world. He's one of our bearded people we see today, who's the panelist. And since that time, I think I've grown to enjoy Bob and his intellect and his ability. And over the years in that particular role, I then migrated to issues with public authorities and worked with many types of public authorities that we created in the state of New York. And in the meantime, I was working for a year, I would say for free, doing transportation in Ways and Means while I was in Program Council, assisting a friend of ours. And then I migrated over to Ways and Means fully, became a deputy that did issues related to debt and capital and local governments, the financial plan, and then from there migrated to become the budget director. And after becoming a budget director, then this gentleman that actually left that position, who was also on this panel, he became the state budget director. I then assumed his role. I was appointed by the speaker to do that. And so here I am today as the Secretary of Ways and Means, but I will have to say also that I am involved in many different other organizations that I would say around the capital region, whether it's cultural, whether it's political, whether it's financial, organization or boards. So this is a continued life that evolving, always trying to be involved in things to.
Sorry to throw you for a loop there, Phillip. Try that one.
Yes, always trying to be involved with activities and with the community. And so I would say that the legislature, what stumbled me about the legislature and working there is that there is always a vast number of questions. Members have questions every single day. So, and that's what I think we found. It's never a boring place. It's a place of just constantly solving problems. And it's good to be there, and it's good to have these members, and so I'm excited for all the years that I've worked there.
So thank you, and as David and Phillip both alluded to, I worked with both of them for the entire time I've been here in Albany. So It's really wonderful to continue that relationship in this role. I couldn't think of two better partners in dealing with this. The level of candor and honesty and integrity that they bring to the job is really unmatched in public service. So it's really, I can't say enough about these guys and this team. That in my own team at Division of Budget, we're really fortunate. So what we'll do today is I brought a slideshow that if you saw my on a budget release date you saw some presentations that I put forward. This is very similar, so forgive me if it's a repeat, but all the same, let's jump right in. So where are we here? There we are. So in crafting our budget for this year, the governor put forward a budget that comes in at $233 billion. And when we're trying to assess the sort of fundamentals of any budget, we try to look back at what is influencing our proposal. Just in the last handful of years, we've had a lot of tumult, post-pandemic. But where are we today? After several years of pandemic growth, there was tumult in our lives and our families and our communities. But immediately post-pandemic, there was this astronomical growth in public and personal income tax receipts. That's all receded. But so has in large part recession fears. Inflation is declining. We think in this year's budget, as we project looking forward, interest rates will take a little bit longer to come back to pre-pandemic levels because the Federal Reserve has endemic levels. Because the Federal Reserve has remained pretty vigilant in there. We saw even signs this week that interest rate changes are not necessarily coming too soon. High interest rates has slowed our economy a bit and our job growth. And so while the Division of Budget, while this budget before the people of the state of New York doesn't project an outright recession, any geopolitical shocks that we see in the news today can certainly slow our growth or bring it into the negative. One of the big items that we talked about a lot with the governor in preparing the budget is where are we in employment in the state of New York? Where do we stand relative to our peers? Because when people are employed, obviously it provides economic benefits, but it also provides relief even to the state financial plan when people earn a good living. They need less from the state government to provide for themselves and their families. So tracking employment has been something that's really key in the governor's mind, and this is a chart that we focused on a lot. In the nation, jobs have rebounded post-pandemic, and in the city of New York, jobs are sort of at the level, pre-pandemic level. Rest of state New York, we're still falling behind a bit, and so you can see here on the chart, the yellow bar representing the nation, the city just cresting the horizontal axis, but you can see the gray bar being the rest of state lagging behind. This is something, so when you see a lot of the governor's proposals as it relates to economic development, jobs creation, you see a lot of that in upstate New York. It's really targeted at this chart right here. Our revenue picture has improved. Last year's budget, when we enacted the budget last year, from the moment that the governor, when Bob was in charge, from the moment the governor put out the executive budget to when we closed the budget jointly with the legislature, the governor's financial plan removed about $10 billion in receipts from the budget, just projections, returning back down to orbit post-pandemic growth. Nevertheless, we're coming into this year's budget with some upside on revenue, gaining back some of the $10 billion that we took out of the plan last year, and as a result, we took about $2.2 billion in new revenues. We pledged that towards paying down the gap. This budget solves for a $4.3 billion gap, and these revenues come in pretty handy to not take other more course-corrective actions to solve for it. There still is a gap, as I said, and what am I doing here? Here we are. And with a gap, you have to solve for hard choices. You have to make hard choices in any budget. And in the last couple of years, when times were aplenty, a lot of those hard choices weren't as necessary. One of the hard choices in correcting the budget is sticking the landing, providing continuing the services we just provided for in the last couple of years, but also trying to hold the line on taxes. This budget does not, the governor's budget does not include an increase in the personal income tax rate. And this chart here just shows where we are relative to our peers. We're the highest taxed state in the nation. If you live in the city of New York in particular, you pay the top rate, 14.776 of income. So this is a threshold that the governor has been very, very targeted about talking about. This is something where New Yorkers of high wealth pay a disproportionate amount of our personal income tax receipts. They remit a disproportionate amount of that. We want to keep people here that will continue to pay those receipts. So this chart just tries to show the pressure that the state of New York faces sort of nationally in a time of high ability for jobs to be to move wherever they wish. We want to make sure whatever jobs we have here stay here, and that we continue to grow high income taxpayers. Going on to just our receipts projection coming into this year, you can see on the 2023 end, you can see the downward slide. That's what I was referring to before when we took about $10 billion out of the revenue target. You can see where we are in 2024. And then you can see the gap between the two bars here just shows that we're growing our way out of it. And into 2028, these are projections that our economics team makes, influenced by national economic indicators and national economic prognosticators too. So we're in line with many of our peers. But I think the gist of this chart is just to say slow but steady growth into the out years on our revenue. You're not going to see humongous swings in revenue, so that influences the process in pulling together a budget. You don't want to overload on new and recurring spending, because in the out years you actually don't have the capacity to finance it. We had a $4.3 billion budget gap, and this table tries to describe how we solved for it, sort of in a cascade way. So first and foremost, all the way on the left, you have our tax receipts revisions up $2 billion. All other receipts and other resources, this reflects current non-general fund tax receipts such as HICRA or lottery. It also reflects some prepayments that we do as a matter of course in a financial plan to smooth out year-to-year variations in spending. We have education, higher education, all other savings. Those are actions we took throughout the budget to restrain out-year growth, or current year and out-year growth. And then in Medicaid, we have $1.2 billion in adjustments to the program. After we do the Medicaid $1.2 billion in adjustments, we actually have additional investments in Medicaid after we solve for the Medicaid, we get to the 1.2 bar. Now we come down and you start to see where some of our pressures are. So the first red bar relates to some of the to Medicaid and projected growth, enrollment growth in both mainstream Medicaid. The public health unwind is not unwinding as fast as we have initially projected in the state of New York, at least. It also includes increased utilization in the managed long-term care program. There's investments in 1115 waiver that was secured just a handful of weeks ago, which will provide for a whole host of different public health delivery initiatives, from hospitals to workforce to health-related social needs. There are some new investments related to the state of the state. And then last, we have $2.4 billion in the budget to address the asylum migrant crisis in the city of New York. In solving for the $4.5 billion budget gap, those actions carry through the plan year, and it takes our gaps down significantly. So so if you can see the blue bar, we're down around $20 billion in gaps in the out years, 559. The last year is a little high, in part because that reflects current law expiration of the high income surcharge on the personal income tax. Also reflects some of our ability to prepay payments between fiscal years, and some of the things we've been doing in the past, certainly prepaying debt, prepaying high interest capital expenditures. Those things, some of those tools are fading, so we're revealing to in our financial plan, we revealed that roughly almost $10 billion in 2028 in adjustments that'll occur. And that's something that certainly looking at that out year, no matter what, is something that we're very, very conscientious of in preparing the budget this year. The budget also has substantial reserves. This is a point of personal pride of the governor. When the governor came in for reserves, the state of New York had about 4% of reserves. When there was an increase in one-time revenue coming from the markets post-pandemic, the governor of the Division of Budget at the time said, well, these revenues are clearly not normal. These are clearly things that are well in excess of what we would otherwise receive. Let's put them in a place where we can actually provide some level of stability in the out years, provide for the sort of gold standard of how any state and any municipal government should plan for tomorrow. And so the dollars that we have in reserves today reflect roughly 15% of our state operating fund expenditures. I think David, Phillip, and I have all been in positions in our prior lives, our prior roles, where economic conditions have forced us to come back, legislature to come back and make adjustments mid-year. I remember the days of, I know some people in here remember during the Patterson years and the DRP, the deficit reduction plan, and going through and cutting programs by 5%, or this sort of nickel and dime exercise, which was really it was really disruptive, obviously, to the nonprofit community, disruptive to all the services that the state provides. Having reserves is a hedge against all of that. It hedges against any economic downturn, and it allows New Yorkers to have the confidence that we can actually weather the storm should anything happen in the upcoming years that is not predicted in the state financial plan. The next item just shows where we're spending relative to from 2022 to 2025. You can see where the state of New York has put commitments into the state budget. Medicaid has grown by 38%, school aid 21%, and then you can go across the board all other. We put migrants on the end just so you can see it's between last year and this year, $4.3 billion in new state assistance to assist the migrant crisis in the city of New York. On this slide, we try to just reveal the extent to which Medicaid and school aid have grown in the last couple of years, but then where they're situated as of the executive budget. Medicaid program has been growing at a very, very healthy clip in the last couple of years. This year's budget allows for 10.9% growth in Medicaid, and that's after adjusting for $1.2 billion and trying to restrain costs by $1.2 billion. It's still growing by nearly 11%. School aid, we've had in the last 3 years, the state of New York has pledged, between $7 billion in the last 3 years to school districts to finance the to foundation aid, to fully fund foundation aid. So you can see there's 7.2%, 9.6%, both percentages well exceeding the statutory benchmark. And then this year, we're trying to bring expenditures back in line with what the state can actually afford in the long run. On the next slide, we reveal school aid growth. Sort of, I just teased it in the last chart, but you can see over the last handful of years the level of school aid that the state of New York has committed is really is unlike any other time in recent history. The executive budget provides $35 billion in school aid in the current year, an $825 million increase. And so since 2021, foundation aid alone has increased by over $6 billion for the state's 670 school districts. So last 3 years, $7 billion in state commitments to schools, $13 billion in new federal commitments to schools. So in the last 3 years alone, $20 billion in new resources to public schools have flowed to the districts. So there's never been a point in history, in my mind, where they've been more well-resourced, and that's a wonderful thing for our school kids, of course. So a bit of good news of where we are. Next chart, another just where we are in time on higher education. Last 2 years, the state of New York has, last two budgets under Governor Hochul's leadership, a new $1 billion has been added to our public higher education colleges and universities. We've also added in the last 3 years $6 billion in capital to the same institutions, making up for lost time. I think that both SUNY and CUNY have had a lot of bottled up need, pent up need, and we're preserving much of those increases in the current year's budget, as you can see here. I alluded to earlier, the budget includes about $500 million in state funds to help for the first year of financing an 1115 waiver. 1115 waivers relate to the Medicaid program and the state's relationship to the federal government, where we demonstrate different, where we put different proposals on the board to provide for, to provoke public health outcomes. This waiver really focuses again on advancing health equity and health disparities, providing one of the biggest tranches of funding under the sort of combined $7.5 billion over the next handful of years relates to health-related social needs, sort of the all-encompassing needs of any Medicaid consumer, nutritional services, supportive housing services, things of that nature. Sort of think about like a wraparound service for a high-needs Medicaid client. So this is something that we're going to be working with CMS and certainly the legislature to just as we finesse going forward, but we're really proud that this was a plane that was landed pretty recently. This chart I included just because in Medicaid, this is, I think, when we look at the entire budget writ large, one of the stories of the budget is demographics generally. So I think if we were to go back a few slides where you see that, you know, we had 11% increase in Medicaid. A lot of that is reflective of our demographic shifts, or not necessarily shift, the sort of the inevitable demographic change of our aging population. There are more folks, baby boomers in particular, coming into the years where they actually need.
Old age, you can say it. Because I'm in it.
Yeah. So this is a reflection of that, and then similarly, you know, sort of conversely, our school-age children, our college-age pupils, we have, we have fewer of both. So in this chart, we just try to reveal that we do have some pressures with our aging population. Just to be clear, not every person over 65 is on the Medicaid program. Not every person over 65 needs state supports. In fact, if you look at some of the data, you can see persons over 65 are. Some people refer to them as the wealthiest generation. Between home wealth and investments, a lot of people over 65 are taking care of their own families, and their young people are still living at home. So this is not to sort of say that that this is like a drag on the economy, because people over 65 are integral to our state financial plan because of what they provide. Thank you, Bob, for all you do for our financial plan. Again, Medicaid growth for years and years and years, restrained over time, particularly under the previous administration. We had a 2% spending cap, and that translated through all manner of services that the state provides. But you can see it pretty starkly here in our chart on Medicaid. You can see just in the last handful of years, allowing for growth, acknowledging that there are stressors in the Medicaid in health services delivery. The state of New York has made some pretty record investments in the last handful of years to make up for lost time. So just look at the yellow part of this chart, and you can see that the trajectory on state spending is vastly different than, say, in the last 10 years. And one of the reasons that we were able to, that you see that chart is just since the governor took office, one of her first actions was to pay off a 1.5% cut that was enacted in the previous administration in a time that was very, very fraught. It was in the height of the pandemic. But the governor paid that off, and then she added 1% 2 years ago across the board for many of the services you see here. And then last year's budget, we made substantial increases for hospitals, nursing homes, and other services. And that's sort of part and parcel to our financial plan. Increases that, after a sea of zeros, we're very, very proud to see that we're actually able to move those numbers. Coming into home, rounding third here. One other item is also put out there for consideration, because it's a big sort of material change to our state financial plan, is the migrant crisis. Last year's budget, we provided $1.9 billion, or the current year budget provides $1.9 billion in response to the migrant crisis. Much of it is pledged to the city of New York. A lot of it is also used by the state of New York for assisting the city, particularly in our National Guard mission. Coming into 2025, we have, again, humanitarian aid in the city of New York, $1.1 billion just to provide for public assistance expenditures for provisioning housing to migrants. We provide 100% state reimbursement for 5,000 beds at Creedmoor, Randall's Island, and Floyd Bennett Field. We provide, the $2.4 billion provides legal and case management services, communicable disease testing, and again, state costs related to the National Guard. I think importantly, if you look at our financial plan last year, we looked at this in a silo, and we said this is something that we're taking on an annual basis. We're doing the same thing here. We're looking at it in 1 year basis. We're collaborating with the city of New York to support their efforts. But I think at the end of the day, this is something I know that everybody in the state of New York, if not the nation, knows is unsustainable. This is not something that any city should be financing unto themselves. No state should be doing this. So I think that the governor has certainly been doing everything that she can, engaging every person across the aisle and across the state and in DC as well to try to rationalize this. This is not a sustainable thing. So obviously this week's news coming out of Congress was a real bummer for most of us in the state of New York. It's unfair to the persons that are it's unfair to the people that are coming across the borders. It's unfair to New Yorkers that have to finance these new costs because $2.5 billion, $2.4 billion is not an unsubstantial sum of money that I'm sure that my colleagues in the legislature would have lots of other uses with. So with that, I talked a lot, so I'll stop and I'll defer to my colleagues so they can give their remarks, and I'm looking forward to talking to all of you afterward.
So, thanks, Blake. Always a great presentation. So there are a lot of policy things and spending priority things that are important to the Democratic Senate Conference. I obviously can't get out in front of that process where we go through the executive budget. In meetings, and we talk through with their chairs and the members of the committee, and kind of work all of those things out over the coming the coming month or so before we release our one house budget. That being said, the leader has come out with certain things, and as have we've been doing the budget hearings over the course of the last couple of weeks, which will continue next week. So I feel comfortable kind of talking about some of those things that have been brought up by the chairs. But before I get into that, there are kind of a couple of items that kind of pop up in the budget every year in the executive budget. For people who are into the process, I think may find it interesting. In the executive budget, there is a provision in the state operations bill that would allow for the transfer of spending amongst appropriations after adoption. It has been in the executive budget and then comes out by the time of the adopted budget. That is something that kind of is something for the budget nerds, or however you want to put it. It's something that we always pay attention to. And so that's kind of just one of those provisions that I thought may be of note for the folks who got up early on a Thursday morning to come down here. As far as kind of budget priorities, one of our main goals in the legislature is usually to restore things that were in the budget last year. So there's kind of a bit of a dance every year where there are things that get added in to the adopted budget, and then the following year they get taken out. It's not everything, but certainly some things. And there's generally an understanding amongst all the parties that yes, this is a 1 year add, and then next year we do it again. So there's a lot of those types of things that certainly we'll be looking to put back. Specific to the education funding that Blake had mentioned, the increases in foundation aid, one of the I think the priorities for our conference is definitely going to relate to the the hold harmless in foundation aid. It's something that's been particularly controversial. It's something that the leader has spoken on, as have our education chairs, as being something that we weren't a big fan of in the executive budget. I don't think that was a secret. So that's certainly going to be an area where I think there'll be a significant amount of pushback. Health, I think we all would agree. I certainly don't want to put words in anyone's mouth. That is going to be an area of contention and kind of just an area of struggle, I think, because it is a huge problem. It is a very expensive problem. Sometimes when there's policy differences, you can kind of work your way through it and figure it out and leave, and nobody's happy, but you can move through. But with this, there's just a ton of money involved, and as much as you may agree or disagree or decide to come to a compromise, we can't make billions and billions of dollars pop up out of nowhere. So I think that is going to be one of the areas that is going to be the most challenging. The Higher Education Committee budget hearing is going on right now, where I imagine they're talking about what's going to be happening at SUNY Downstate. There was a release last night about kind of what that's going to look like, and that's an area where we have members who are very concerned about what's going to happen for the employees, for the people who utilize that facility, for the doctors who are trained there. And so I think that's one of those issues that I think is going to, it's one of our priorities, but it's also one of those things that is actually just really hard to fix, to figure out. I don't envy anyone who's on that committee that's supposed to be figuring out the future of healthcare in New York State. I think those are kind of the big pieces. I've only used a third of my time. So I don't know if we want to turn it over to Phil.
Sure.
Very efficient. What can I say?
Phillip will fill up the time. I do want to say that I am that tall guy with the beard, I think, that he referred to before. And I do want to say something because I think Philip's career shows that, you start out, I think, as all three of us, or all four of us have, in different positions. And then through hard work and, persistence and the torture of going through it every year, you get to the place where you're finally Secretary of Ways and Means. So I just wanted to congratulate him. I know he's been doing this for a long time because I know he was there when I was still there. So congratulations, Philip, on the new spot.
Thank you, Bob, and thanks, Blake, and for making this good presentation. Clearly, as Dave had mentioned, in terms of the reacting to the governor's budget, I think our conference might share some of the same concerns. So again, our conference, as you heard, after the budget has been delivered, has been inquiring from various constituencies and groups out there doing the public hearings, which is still taking place. I think last night it went close to 11 o'clock. But these things are important for our members to actually garner information as to help in adjusting to what to react to the governor's budget. The members themselves, I think also, as I said earlier, just a bundle of people that have questions and ideas that they represent from their various districts. And so when they're here in Albany and they're here just listening to the governor's budget is always bringing out something bold. And so they tend to react sometimes in bold ways. And we expect to see in March is really when the process takes place, when we will actually respond completely to what's going on in the governor's budget. But if we can just bear with me to a certain degree, what Dave was saying earlier in terms of education, the governor came out with a new proposal this year. The media and some of the members are still reacting to it. These are important adjustments along the way because it's important to realize that with the spending gaps that Blake had outlined, there's a need for them to come up with a budget that is looking the way it is, that's balanced. The legislature then has an extra month or two beyond the governor to react to that. And in that process, there is always this revenue discussion that will take place by the end of this month or beginning in early March, whereby we will determine how much dollars are available for various spending needs. And so the good thing about what Blake has done is that they did the hard work in getting us the budget, and then the legislature then does the hard work in trying to change whatever it has to do and come up with its own ideas. And we have a little extra time when we look at the numbers in terms of the revenues information beyond the executive. So we're a little more, always a little more interested in re-estimating those revenues, and we're generally making higher than what the executive says, because they have a time when they have to stop and making changes to the budget. So what we expect the legislature to do is that, I think even right now, as Blake has mentioned earlier, they took up some of the revenue numbers from the last time, which is roughly, a couple months ago, by about $2.2 billion. We kind of anticipated it was going to be growing just as high. And then I think that what we've seen in the economy in the last couple of weeks, we've heard how, unemployment is normalizing. We've heard that the job market is increasing nationally, which surprised many economists and forecasters in that particular realm, which is good. And it's also bad, because in a sense that, yes, I think the Federal Reserve wanted to maintain, interest rates to a point where it curbed consumer spending. And so with the rise of jobs, which is good for people's household income and their families, we also, I don't know if, what will happen long term in terms of bringing down those interest rates, because, that's how the Federal Reserve looks to do. They might want to maintain it. So we're just making some predictions as they also make predictions. But yes, so that would have an impact in our revenues. But I think to a certain degree, I think there's more there at the table to discuss. So in terms of the spending side of the budget, as Dave had outlined, I think our conference has focused on education, its new adjustments. Healthcare is a big issue this year. As Blake talked about, 11% growth in Medicaid, but it's still an area that we will have to focus on. And it's a unique area, and people are thinking how to deal with that in terms of the gaps that's there, because in there, as Blake has mentioned before, the governor put forth this $1.2 billion reduction in Medicaid to maintain costs, but yet there is about $400 million in there that hasn't been itemized yet. So there's still much work to be done over the next month or so to determine what those things are. Perhaps the executive might come out and indicate what it is, and then otherwise the legislature has to determine what it is, working with them to get through the budget, which is going to be very difficult. So I think from our house, we're very concerned about that. As David mentioned, downstate, that's another interesting issue that we have. I would like also to say some of the, even in the healthcare, some of the cuts to the quality pools, these are things that are important to even our members, and they've mentioned these things, and we will see what will happen. The executive came out with, I would guess, a housing proposal that I guess started last year, that never really ended in discussion, and is continuing again this year. And I think for our conference, we have to look at this holistically. I think the members do want to look at it holistically, because there are winners and losers on both sides. And how do you propose one side of the equation to deal with the impacts that it would have in New York City, and the other side of the equation, how it relates to the tenants. So there is always that mixture of debate as to getting a reasonable conclusion in that particular matter. And that's still an ongoing issue I think we'll see throughout the year. But yes, I know that one thing that's came up in terms of discussion was the retail theft, and the executive had some ideas there that's interesting. It's a world that's ever changing. We're seeing an increased activity in that particular area, and so we will yet to determine what will happen there. I know for the tinky-winky small portion, the environmental world is always, as they had a hearing last night, always seeking to make the place a better place to live, cleaner environment, water, air. They would like more money in that particular realm. They didn't really, as you heard from the hearing, they didn't really like the idea that we've, made the executive made a small reduction there, and they would like to have it put back. So there are many areas that we will look to adjust and resolve and alleviate, and the concerns of the members, the concerns of the people in New York. And, we have 150 of them. Our conference is roughly 105 or 103, whatever. And it is, you hear them all the time. That's all they do. Ideas, 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 new ideas, why the old one isn't working, why the new one needs to work, and what's in there to improve. And so we're here to just solve that. That's what our role is, solve that and make it happen.
All of you, thanks. But maybe we can pick up, Blake did the overview, which I think was great, of all the issues and how the executive budget gets planned. I think, and both David and Phillip, I think, touched on this, but maybe I'll ask both David and Phillip. I don't know that everyone knows. I don't know that everyone knows all the time what Phillip started talking about, which, how does like a conference of 100 people or 60 people or 45 people in the Senate, how do you present the budget? How do they think about it? What does a kind of conference look like? Maybe you guys can spend a few minutes talking about that.
Sure. So from our perspective, in the Senate majority, and I got to see the Assembly majority too when I was there, but I don't know what it looks like now, to be blunt. The chairs of the relative committees go through and they present a PowerPoint to the conference, where they go through all the major spending items and all the Article 7s kind of in their area. We make sure that we get everything that's proposed in the executive budget. So sometimes you have a couple of kind of random things thrown in that don't necessarily fit under one committee chair's purview, but we go through everything. We actually just finished that process in our house yesterday. So we go through. There are questions. There additional information requests. We'll go back to the executive with some things. One of the nice things about Phillip was mentioning all the questions from members. We have just speaking for our conference, we have great members who know a tremendous amount about the areas that they're the chairs of, but then also about other things too, from their life experiences before they join the legislature, or just from general knowledge. So they ask a lot of great questions that sometimes staff has not really thought of, and then we'll go back and try to get that information so that we get a really full view of all of the executive proposals. And then from there, we start to build our one house once we have really a good sense of what was in the executive budget. Members write letters to the leader. Actually, in our house, they're due today. And then we'll go through those letters, because sometimes members may not speak up in conference. Sometimes they'll be at the legislative hearing the day a certain topic is discussed in conference, so they won't have we won't have a good sense of how they feel about a particular topic. We incorporate those things into work groups. We talk to the leadership, and then kind of through an iterative process, we end up building our one house. For the most part, we try to be pretty definitive in what we say. Occasionally, we can't come to a definitive conclusion by the time the one house is done. So we'll put in something into our resolution that says, we can generally support XYZ without a dollar number or without, an Article 7 attached to it, because it's something that we care about. We want to move forward, but sometimes things pop up, on March 11th, and we have to release on March 12th or whatever the day is, so we don't necessarily get to formulate that. And sometimes other things pop up. I'm looking at my notes and realized, we talked about Phillip talked about the revenue consensus process, where we figure out how much extra money there is to spend. And sometimes things pop up, like Community Bank of New York yesterday kind of tanking. So in the next 3 or 4 weeks before we come to our consensus, we'll have to see how that really plays out. Hopefully it won't have an impact on revenues, and we'll be able to continue the tradition of the legislature forecasting additional revenues based on what has happened between the executive budget and the end of February. But it's certainly that's another one of those things that can pop up that ends up changing the dynamics of what's going on. Same thing with SUNY Downstate. They released a plan last night. It was not able to be incorporated in the executive budget because of kind of timing issues. So that's something that I don't know if it's going to be in the 30-day amendments or if that's something that continues to kind of get played out and figured out in the coming weeks.
The Assembly Majority Conference, if you was declared as very large, it's 100 and something members, and I don't want to use this in a simple way. It's like herding cats because they're ready, they're all ready, and again, so as Dave was saying, we have a conference. Ours have not finished in terms of our budget review because there's so many different areas. They really do take a very long time. So every time session ends, and it has ended of these last few weeks, we enter into a budget conference, and it takes quite a few hours to get through each and every subject area. The staff works with the chair from both the program side and again the Ways and Means side, and we put together our presentation. The chair delivers, and then the entertaining of questions, the barrage of questions begins. And so as we do not actually make decisions 100% then. We wait till pretty much after the executive follows its constitutional requirement or obligation of providing a 30-day amendment. And then we go into the tank in terms of trying to craft the one house. And when we do that, we also have a conference for that too, which is also very lengthy when the chairs are making presentations to conference. Again, members will share their opinions and again, new ideas. And as we enter into, I guess, a revenue consensus, that's all taking place then because, we have an idea what almost the upper limit of where we could go in the spending side from the revenues. And again, we do craft the budget roughly around the one house around the second week or so of March. And then doing that, that's when the staff actually learns even more because now you're actually preparing a document that you have to take ownership to when it goes to the floor for debate. So any new staff that came on board in January or the end of the year, they get I would say they're going through a storm, a snow blizzard in January and February, and by the time they get to the early part of March, there is a clear understanding of what you're doing, and so and the members also have a very clear understanding of what they want and desire within the budget. The speaker is listening to them all, and then he makes a final decision with the chairs as to how to proceed from there. And then from there, my friend, after in the middle of March to the end of March or whenever that day is when that term budget ends, it's a crazy race. It's almost like in a car race. You start out on a racetrack. You thought you had your car fully made because you made this car, and then you end up driving it. You realize there's something wrong with some component that you never expected in your life. That's what happens in the budget process. Emotions fly. It's really driven by personality at that point. And so, and at the end of the day, cooler heads prevail. I think these people here at this table have to have cooler heads, and we have to prevail to moderate any high temperatures that have taken place. And we do wait for the members when they're ready to actually get to that point where it's passed and the governor is with the legislature and we have a budget.
I often think, and I should thank the three of you just for last year because I think we did revenue consensus in 24 hours. But I think it showed how folks have to work together in this process to get things done. Blake, looking at it from a different seat this year, what strikes you about that?
About revenue consensus or the process writ large?
More the process writ large.
I think the biggest thing that that's weighed upon me is just our out year deficits, our ability to finance things in the long run. I think that sometimes in the legislature, with respect to my colleagues, I was there for 20 years. Sometimes we are, going from. I know that David and Phillip and their principals care deeply about our financial plans. So I don't mean to dismiss. That's not what I'm trying to say here. But I think that one of the things that I've been really, my team has been so wonderful in engaging me on is just the out-year impacts of some of these things, of some of the actions that we take in the executive budget, and what the implications are for restorations, not just this year, not just to clear the deck and shake hands and walk away, but what are we talking about next year? What are we talking about the following year? Because those are the decisions that really, those are the ones that in the long term they come back to bite you when you overcommit, and in the out years you're actually starting to cut because you have you got a victory in year one, but year three it's not something you can actually sustain. So I think just that level of sustainability of the things we do is really I think is foremost in my mind, for sure.
Thanks. Maybe as a follow-on to that, the legislative folks, I mean, that's always the tension, right, between getting something done now and getting something done, over the long haul. It is a legislative election year this year. How does that affect how the two secretaries, Phillip and David, does that materially affect what goes on in the budget process, or is it more or less a year like any other year?
I've been there. I know. I've been there for quite a few decades, and I would have to say that no year has ever been the same. Every year there is something unique about that year that makes whatever. And election years are important to our members. Yes, they would like to make sure that they are doing their jobs, they're satisfying the needs of their constituents, and of course they want to be reelected. And in doing so, they are also giving their constituents the things that they need in order for them to be encouraged. And so we have, I think that's, election years are good years. Budgets are always good. But the last couple of years have been like wonderful budgets that I can say from the legislative perspective. This governor has agreed and has turned out some very good budgets. And as Blake has pointed out there in some of the slides, you saw that in healthcare. I mean, this is the first time you've seen hospitals receiving monies in the last whatever number of years you might have said. We've then paid out, in a sense, fulfilled the need for foundation aid. And so these are good things that, they will expect to see. At the same time, as Blake was saying, there is a caution. And Bob, and we've been there for so many years. I've seen in my life roughly every 10 years, there's a deficit cycle that has taken place in the budget. So for when I came on, the state was tanking in the early 90s. I just came on when they instituted ALCAC, which they used the sales tax dollars to fill, billions of dollars to fill a deficit hole. Then all of a sudden came around in 2001, I think was it, when they had the World Trade Center. Revenues kind of tanked. The state then, borrowed, $4 billion again in tobacco monies to help, backfill, spending that occurred during the state. And then when the stock market tanked again just to the end of the 2008-9 period. Again, the state ended up, doing extra borrowing there. And then, it just happened that in this particular cycle where COVID hit, where again, when we came up with the budget, it was $15 billion less than what it should be. And then for some strange reason, high unemployment at that particular time too, which is, as you've seen around the country. It also was a time when you saw the quickest recovery ever in the history of this country and the history of the state of New York. So, we saw that deep decline, and then we also saw revenues came into the state of New York, the greatest increase in revenues we've ever seen in all time. So the pandemic had positive things and negative things, positive to the financial markets, negative to some households, but it also see a lot of job restrictions that took place, and yet people make more money. And today, what you're finding out is that even though we saw a huge decline in revenues last year and the year just after 2 years after the pandemic, year 4, we are now, right? I think recovery is starting to occur. I think it isn't as bad as we kind of thought it would have been, from last year. I think one of the areas that we always look at is the, variable rate money. I shouldn't say variable rate, but people who are actually making investing money who are not necessarily paycheck to paycheck people. So they have seen, I think, a 44% decline is what the executive was predicting, and now we're finding it's less than 44% decline. So there's some positive things that's occurring in the economy, and I think as a result of that, an election year, you will see some unique things coming out of the legislature.
Because all of the members are up for election every 2 years, I don't think it has quite as big of an impact as it does with some other electeds, because they're just never that far away from their next election. That being said, it does put some kind of time pressures on the legislature, particularly at the end of session, because there's primaries, and this year with potential redistricting at the congressional level, it kind of creates some weird time issues, and depending on what happens with the redistricting commission, it could just kind of suck up some energy. There's only so many hours in a day. There are only so many people who work in the legislature, so I think that actually could potentially have a bigger impact. I mean, members want their school districts to be fully funded every year. It's not just an election year thing, particularly, I think, again, because of the every 2 year election cycle. It's not like they can say, I got another 3 years before my next election. It's every year or every other year.
Thanks, David. I think Phillip raised a interesting one. Maybe all three of you maybe can touch on it. Every year is different, right? I mean, I recommend a book to everyone about the fiscal crisis in the late 70s or 80s, and it's called Crisis in the Making. It's out of print, I think, but it's a great book. But it seems to me like the past 20 years, we've just been from one crisis to the next. And I think Phillip outlined all of them. How do you deal with that kind of stuff? How does it put pressure on you guys and on your conferences and on the governor to kind of, how do you do budgets in that context?
I'll start by just saying that, I think it's hard to divorce yourself from the realities of the people that we encounter in our day-to-day lives and the struggles that people have, or the aspirations that they share to spend, to provide more spending for the things they care about. But, if you look at it from from the task at hand in actually creating a budget has it's obviously a statement of principles, a statement of values, but it's also a statement of, by necessity, you have a financial plan. You have limits to what you can do. And I think that when the governor looks at the budget, she says, well, there's a bunch of hard choices that are going to be part and parcel to any budget that we're putting forward. And there's all sorts of different constituency groups that care deeply about their thing. But when the governor looks at the budget, she says, well, if we can't do all of this thing that the constituency group cares about, are there other items that they too rely upon? So, for example, some of our poverty initiatives, I was talking to some folks the other day, we have an item in the budget this year to provide for some targeted interventions in 5 upstate zip codes that are just really chronically struggling. And people have said, well, is that enough? Is $50 million enough for 5 zip codes? It seems a little light after years of this didn't happen overnight. And the answer is, well, probably not. But in those same zip codes, do we have a functioning public health system? Do we have a functioning public school system? Are we partnering with counties so they can deliver some public assistance benefits on the local level? Are we looking at the whole person in any budget? And I think that's what helps us sleep at night is, you just do your level best to try to address the needs of the whole person, from the least among us to sort of middle class families, making sure that their taxes remain low, making sure their children have good schools to attend, making sure that there's housing development, pushing the agenda on housing development. So all those things, I think we tend to look at it in that sort of on the arc of everything, and that helps us to kind of rationalize any of these crazy years of all the exogenous things that occur and throw at us in any year. That's the sort of the guidepost for us.
Can you repeat the question?
How do we, every year's a crisis. How do we function?
I mean, I think when you first start out, at least I did. I remember I was doing taxes, so it wasn't quite as much of a crisis area because it never felt that way anyway. But I remember thinking that the human services people and some of those other health folks would get very emotionally involved in the things that they were working on. And I think what we're doing is very important. So it's very easy for that to happen. And the impacts are real on people who really need help. And also, children's education and all of these important things. But I think to a certain extent, I think it's true that there is always a something that feels like a crisis and rises to that level. But I also think at the end of the day, there is a financial plan. We have a job to do, and it's to get a balanced, or at least very close to balanced budget every year. And so it forces you to make tough decisions. And at the end of the day, if we don't get an adopted budget, either on time or close-ish to on time, it creates additional problems. So there's kind of pressures from multiple places where you're, we say it a lot, you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So you try to do that good to get that 50 million to those zip codes, even if maybe that isn't enough. Because if you don't come to an agreement on the 50 million, then it's going to be zero. So it's kind of pushing through.
They used to say in the old days that when there's no money to spend, the budget will be ending soon. And when there is extra money, we'll fight to the death, and the budget takes a very long time to come to an end. In those crisis years that we've experienced, as I kind of outlined during those decades, the legislature and the governor, we have made decisions to actually cut. So it is a reality as to have a balanced financial plan. By Constitution, we have to have the general fund balanced, and so therefore, the legislature do perform their duty in making those cuts. No one is ever happy, and I've worked with them over this time period. It's a very upsetting moment, and so people realize that. I can think of, just going back to just a crisis before this one, when we had the cuts, we took out monies from education, and there's something called the gap elimination plan had to take place where you cut school districts. But you go back before then, there was time when crisis took place. We cut, AIM, and we cut, which is monies going to, cities and towns and local governments and so forth. The legislature will have to react, will have to make those difficult choices, and they do make those choices to have a balanced budget. And when we come out of those periods, my friend, we also spend and provide for the needs of the constituents. So it's a cycle. It's a rolling cycle that people adjust to. It does impact local governments, as it's sometimes whenever crisis takes place, it takes 2 years past that time for municipalities to actually feel that impact. So the taxpayers do feel it sometimes in their property taxes, and the legislature has come back and mitigate those years with helping with statewide reductions in that particular area. So it's a cycle, and the budget cycle will continue. Good years, lean years we look back and say, oh, that was a great year, like we did in the last 2 years, and I think we adjust. Our members understand, and we adjust. No one is ever happy, but we adjust.
David made me think, and I think I'll ask folks for a closing comment, but David made me think there was a famous English economist, turn of the last century, who said that a good analyst had hard heads and soft hearts. And I think that kind of fits with what you're describing as part of the process. But I'll let you guys have 2 minutes to talk about something you want to talk about here at the end. And I want to thank you very much for doing this.
I don't know that I have much in the way of closing remarks other than thank you to everybody that's here. Appreciate you being here, hearing us out. Certainly myself, the Division of Budget, are here for any of your follow-ups. We're always available in the Capitol building. But I'll just say that I'm looking forward to working with these two gentlemen. They've been, as I said earlier, personally, professionally, just wonderful people to work with and engage with. They get it. They're not afraid to make. They give well-rounded advice to their members, and we all let the chips fall where they may. And I think that we put forward a budget that solves for a $4.3 billion gap. It doesn't raise taxes, but I'll say that we know that we're going to engage with our partners to mitigate some of the actions that are in there, as any budget. We know the legislature has priorities, and I know that those priorities have to sort of just fit in the broader financial plan, and hopefully that, and certainly we know it's going to become a sustainable product into the long run. So again, I'm looking forward to working with my partners here, and certainly their members and leadership. And that's it.
Also, I want to thank you very much for having me and my fellow panelists and friends and colleagues. I look forward to the next. Well, look forward might be a bit of an exaggeration, but I'm looking forward to spending it with them. And we will, I'm confident that we'll come to a budget conclusion that serves the Senate majority, as well as the other constituencies that we need to. I think like Bob said, every year is, or Phillip said, every year is very different, and I think this year is like that as well. But I think that in the end we will come to a budget that works, and we'll figure it out over the next month and a half.
Again, I would also like to thank you all for being here. It's a privilege to be here to share our points of view. I would just like to answer a question, which is, how do we work together and yet be separate? It reminds me when I told some new people when they start a job, there's a Bugs Bunny cartoon, if they can indulge me for a small story. There's a Bugs Bunny cartoon whereby you have this sheepdog and a coyote battling all day over the sheep. One protects and one tries to do anything they can to take advantage of the sheep. At the end of the day, when it's all over, the whistle blows, they all check out. In the old days, you have, the clocks that you used to stick your card in or whatever it is, and it punches out, and there it is. And they say, well, good night, Fred. Good night, so-and-so. We'll see you tomorrow. We'll see you tomorrow. And they start back tomorrow all over again. Each of us have our own different constituency, our bosses, our assembly. I have the assembly to deal with, and Blake has the governor, and Dave has the Senate. We all have different roles. We will all fight during the day, and at the end of the day, cordiality, we say good night. But that's really took place at the end of the budget cycle, where we actually say good night, and I'll see you tomorrow on another good day. So that's where we are. We do enjoy our job. We all have a different role. We all fight to do what we have to do, but it's going to be a successful time. And we're here to, the members of our conference is here to deliver a budget at the right time, on time.
Well, then you beat me, so thank you. Thank you all. Thanks for coming.